you don't sustain your potential without, even if you don't develop it. It doesn't just sit around. It goes stale and curdles and gets sour. And so it's not an acceptable choice, but people make that choice all the time. Especially if they think the Great Father isn't anything but Captain Hook, right? A terrible pirate tyrant who's terrified of death. Crocodile, right? With the clock in his stomach. It's already got a piece of him, and that's the Dragon of Chaos. And he's being chased by the Dragon of Chaos. And like, if you're terrified of the Dragon of Chaos and you're in the patriarchal role, you're going to be a tyrant. And then why the hell would anyone grow up to want to be like you? One of the things I see in my clients very, very often, and this is more characteristic of the males than the females, is that many of them will not allow themselves to experience anger or aggression or to express it because they had tyrannical fathers. And so one of the things they decided when they were like 4 was, I'm never going to be like that. It's like, well, that doesn't work out because, you need the capacity for anger and hostility and aggression and all that. You have to have that at hand. And you don't fix it by refusing to manifest it. All that does is cripple you, because you're missing half of your emotional dynamism and a whole chunk of your power. You don't have that many sources of power. You've got enthusiasm, that's a good one. Curiosity, interest, appreciation for beauty. Anger is unbelievably useful. It's a tremendous reservoir of power, and you don't want to suppress that. You want to harness it so it's at hand, so that people don't mess with you. Because they will, people will push, especially pushy people. And if you can't, well, if you can't push back, they're going to walk all over you. They won't even notice, because you'll just move. And they won't even notice that they pushed you over. So when you'll go home, you'll be all resentful and irritated and brood on it for a month, and it's like, they didn't even notice anything happened. So, so the men I've seen often will refuse themselves access to anger in particular. And then with women, it's often the case that they have a harder time getting access to it, because women are more agreeable than men. So it's harder for women often to be, it's hard for a woman, even if she's pretty damn tough, to really contend with a guy who's really tough. It's difficult, because guys who are really disagreeable, especially if they're physically intimidating and super smart, man, those people are very, very difficult to deal with. Because they'll cut you into pieces verbally, and they won't budge. And so you have to really ratchet up your preparation before you can withstand that. And a lot of women here who are going to be in corporate environments and dealing with people who are tough, you got to get prepared for that, and it's no joke. There's some very, very, very rock hard people out there, and that's a good thing, because nothing would happen without them. But they're a force to contend with. So anyways, the Dragon of Chaos, roughly speaking, differentiates itself into these fundamental, you could say personified elements, but personified is the wrong idea, because usually when you think of something as being personified, you think of it as being something, and then you act as if it's taken on personified qualities. So it's like a projection. Now I don't think that's how it works. I think that we naturally experience the world in the personified categories. And then we have to take them apart to get the world, to get the differentiated world out of them. So for example, when you're a baby, roughly speaking, the world is your mother. And then as you differentiate the world, it starts to turn into things that aren't your mother. But it isn't like you confuse the world with your mother to begin with. It's the mother is the world to begin with. And it's a perfectly reasonable way of thinking about it. I mean, you're only this big. Your mother's really big. And she's taken 3 billion years to build. So, that's a force of nature to contend with. And by conceptualizing that entity as the world, you've done a pretty good job of initial modeling. Because think about this. You're actually a reflection of the world. Right? You really are, because you were shaped by the world in your evolutionary development. It's like, here's the world, here's you. You're a little reflection of the world. Because the world has made you, and so you embody it. The world is the sort of place where something like you can adjust to it. That means you're a lot like the world. And so if you start out with the assumption that the world is a lot like your mother, it's like, that's a pretty good assumption. It is pretty much like your mother. And she is a force of nature. And so it's not personification. It's first pass understanding. And then, the Father comes into it in one form or another, in a fractured form perhaps, or a complete form. You hope that you have a parent, you hope you have an archetypal parent in some sense, who embodies the entire dynamic range of what it means to have that gender. Because then they're a really good representative of the world. Also, most of the world that you're going to interact with isn't stuff, it's people. So, insofar as your mother and your father are the world, that's a really good model, because everyone you meet is going to be your mother or your father, roughly speaking. So, if they're very dynamic people, and they embody the full range of human possibility, insofar as one person can do that, then they're excellent models for what you're going to be interacting with for the rest of your life. And that is what they should be, right? Because on average, what you should do for your children is be as much like the world as you can be, because that'll prepare them for the world. So you shouldn't be too nice, because the world isn't too nice. And you shouldn't be too harsh, because then you'll just crush them. But you shouldn't be, making things easy for them. You should be making things as difficult for them as they can possibly manage. And it takes you really have to have a relationship with the child to be able to do that, because you've got to keep them in the zone of proximal development. And to do that, you have to know what they're like. And so if they can carry 5 pounds Monday, you put another ounce on Tuesday, and that way you allow. It's the anti-Oedipal approach. You encourage them to become strong and independent. Very hard on parents to do that, especially if they define their lives by their children. Because they won't want the child to leave. That's not a good thing. Because you don't end up with the child, you end up with a crippled monster. What is it that you can use to buttress yourself against the undeniable catastrophes of existence? Because it's obvious to everyone that existence is tragic in its fundamental essence, right? Because people are limited and flawed and mortal. It's that's a big problem. Now, hypothetically, quite well by traditional religious structures. But then our ability to assume that they were reasonable ways of framing existence is being badly damaged or called into question by the rise of scientific, materialistic, and objective thinking. So the psychological, the academic psychological response to that has been in many ways that, well, your inframing only shields you from the tragedy of being, and that's what it is. It's a defense mechanism, and that's the terror management, guys. It's right. Fundamentally, your basic problem is that you're terrified of dying, and there's not a bloody thing that can be done about that, so you have to, put up shields of various sorts so that you're not constantly assaulted by that problem as you go through your life. And it's a variant of Freudian theory. So that's one theory, and then there's a variant theory, which is positive illusions, which is the idea that, it's closely related, is that you can just delude yourself in an optimal way about the structure of being so that you can pretend that things are going to work out better for you than they probably are, and then you don't have to be worried about the fact that it's tragic because you just concentrate on your simplistic, optimistic, illusions. It's like, those are damn dismal theories, because they basically say that if you woke up and opened your eyes, what you see would be so terrible that you would die. Or that you would want to die, that it would drive you to suicide. You got to be careful before you tell people that that sort of thing is true. Because you're undermining their capacity to live a genuine existence. And you're also saying, well, you can't live a genuine existence because the weight of it would be so heavy that it would it would destroy you, or it would drive you into a position where you wanted to be destroyed. It's like, well, before we get so damn pessimistic about it, we might start thinking about whether there are other phenomena that aren't illusory or delusional or defense mechanisms that act. Are characterized by meaning. And so, one of the things I suggested to you at the beginning of this class, was that you watched what you said to find out if what you said was making you stronger or weaker, and that you can actually feel that. That's kind of a Rogerian idea, because Rogers would say that if what you're saying wasn't in sync with your embodied being, roughly speaking, because Rogers was really an embodied theorist, that you would feel that as a kind of discordance, and that would weaken you. And so, it's a much older and deeper idea than that, but Rogers articulated it very well. Well, there's another experiment that you can run that's also very much worth attending to, which is watch and see what's meaningful. Don't think about it. Just notice. Notice when you're engaged in something enough so that the fact of you doing it is sufficient for the task.